Be'ezrat Hashem, Naaseh v'natzliach. I want to welcome you to another session of our Parashat Shavua learning. This week's parasha is Parashat Vayechi. The name of the class is called Yoseph's Tears. Last week we spoke about it. We said that maybe next year we'll do a class about it. But as I was reading the parasha, I found 3 more times that Yosef cried. And it was a sign to me that the class about Yosef's tears has to happen now. So tonight is a very, very interesting class. Maybe something that typically you don't hear about. We're going to concentrate on the emotion of crying and how it translates in the life of Yosef. And we'll see what is our life lesson, what is our takeaway from the crying of Yosef for today's world. We're going to get started with the first pasuk. Parashat Vayechi begins with the famous pasuk of Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana. Yaakov lives in Egypt for 17 years. Chazal tell us, pay attention to the first word. The first word Vayechi has a numerical value of 34. Vav and Yud is 16. Chet is 8. 16 plus 8 is 24. And then you add the last Yud of Vayechi, the Yud, it becomes what? 34. And they tell us, Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov was alive for 34 years. Which 34 years? The 17 years that he taught. The 17 years that he was with Yosef, when Yosef was up until the age of 3, and the 14 years that he learned with him, a full 17 years, and then the final 17 years when he was in Egypt, when he was around Yosef. Vayechi Yaakov, a total of 34 years, the 17 would be raising Yosef, and the 17 later on when he was in Mitzrayim. We are right now at the last parasha of Sefer Bereshit. And if we just summarize, when it talks about Yaakov, it talks about the end of the life of Yaakov. Yaakov is going to pass away at the age of 147. And in this particular parasha, the parasha deals with Yaakov getting sick and giving all the blessings over to his children. And then we get to somewhat to the absolute end of the parasha, Perek Nun Pasuk Aleph, and we start with something very interesting. It says over there, Vayipol Yosef al penei aviv. I'll go one pasuk before. Vaychad Yaakov letzavot et banav. He finished giving orders over to Yaakov. Finished giving the orders over to his children. Vayesof raglav el hamita. He picked up his legs and he put him on the bed. Vayegava, and he expired. Vayeasef el amav, and he was taken away to his people. Then pasuk nu, perek nun pasuk aleph. Vayipol Yosef al penei aviv. Yosef falls on his father's face. Vayefk alav, and he started to cry. Vayishaklo, and he kissed him. And here we are once again. Another time where it's mentioned that Yosef is crying. If you recall, last week we touched on it. And I might repeat some of last week's learning just to wake up to refresh our memory, as well as to build off of on it. But we said that it was very noticeable that Yosef was crying all the time in last week's parasha. I went ahead and I counted how many times the Torah brings Yosef crying, and it says that in this week's parasha is 3, but in reality it's a total of 8 times. Yosef cries 8 times, it's mentioned. And we want to ask ourselves the basic question: why is Yosef crying so much? It's noticeable. The Torah mentions it several times. So if the Torah mentions it several times, there has to be a lesson there collectively, and there has to be a lesson there individually. Furthermore, I'm sure if we stop and we analyze every crying session, we'll see that there's a lesson there to be learned. In order to understand why Yosef is crying, we need some history. Let's go back. Let's go back in time. Let's go back to the story of Dinah and Yosef. And you might say, there's no connection. There's not one story in the Chumash, in Sefer Bereshit, that connects Dinah to Yosef. You're right. The connection that Dinah and Yosef have is mentioned in the Midrash. It says that Leah got pregnant for the 7th time. And when she got pregnant for the 7th time, there was a reality, a metziut, that she already has 6 boys and she's about to have her 7th. The 2 maids, the 2 servants, the 2 shfachot have 2 kids each. So Leah has 6, Bilhah has 2, Zilpah has 2, that's a total of 10. If she's going to have 1 more baby, that means that her sister Rachel is going to have less than the shfachot, less than the servants, less than Zilpah, less than Bilhah. And she says, that will not happen. That cannot be a reality. So she started to do a din. She started to make judgments. What should I do? I'm pregnant. So what did she do? She began to pray. She began to pray for the baby that's in her womb to change. For it not to be a male, but to be a female. Why? So like that, it'll end up being that she'll have a girl, and her sister Rachel still can have 2 tribes of the shfachot. That she'll have 2 tribes in the bare minimum like the shfachot. And by the way, this din that she made, this judgment that she made, is exactly the reason why Dinah is called Dinah. Because she's the product of that judgment.
Her judgment.
Because at the end of the day, back in the days, people used to name their children according to the moment. And we know that a person's name is also their essence. A person's name is the essence of who they are as an individual. Even the letters that make up their name has a lot of effect of who they are, who they turn out to be as individuals. So Dinah was the product of her mother's judgment on her 7th pregnancy. So we see that Dinah was actually supposed to be a male. She was supposed to be a boy, a zachar. But it was overturned. Hitapcha be'ikvut tefilot Leah, because of the prayers of her mother. And from here we also learn, Chazal tell us, that when a woman gets impregnated, she has up to 40 days to pray on the gender. She has up to 40 days to pray. After 40 days, it's useless. You know, a father praying at the delivery room for a Ben Zachar on the 9 months to give him, useless, right? But in the first 40 days, there is a toilet, there is a possibility for the prayers to be heard. It's brought in Pelaot Edotecha. It says that Dinah was meant to be a Zachar, she was supposed to be a male. V'nithapecha lenekeva. She was turned into a male. Why? Be'ikvot tfilat Leah. I'm sorry. She was supposed to be a male. V'nithapecha lenekeva. She turned into a female because of the prayers of her mother Leah. And we see that what that caused is it left some sort of a male residue, let's call it, in her character. Because it says over there, in Perek Lamed Dalet, Pasuk Aleph, Vatetze Dinah. What is Vatetze Dinah? It says that Dinah went out. We know that men and women have different characteristic traits. Meaning what? The teva, the nature of a woman is to stay home. As the Pasuk in Tehillim is, Kol kevuda bat melech penima. A woman is supposed to stay at home, tznuah, not in public, not, being out there with men, being out there in all these different places. That's her honor, that's her beauty, that's her place, that's her tzniut. So for a woman to go out of her house and be in the marketplace, hey, how you doing, how are you, what's your name, nice to meet you. That's a guy thing. So when it says Vatetze Dinah, we saw that we shared a little bit of a character that belonged to a man. Furthermore, even though that Dinah had Teva Shel Zachar, she had tendencies, or she was leaning to have some male characteristics. Who was the direct result of that prayer? It affected also who? Yosef. Because when her sister Rachel gave birth, who did she give birth to? Yosef. So this whole swap of Dinah and Yosef meant that Dinah had a little bit of Teva Zachar, and Yosef had a little bit of Teva Shel Nekeva. He also had some residue of female characteristics. For example, Dinah, we said, was Yetzanit. If you recall, what was her problem? As soon as she went out, she got noticed. Who noticed her? Shem. And Shem was crazy for her beauty. What was so unique about her beauty? Well, it's not what's so unique about her beauty, it's what's sickening about Shem. Shem loved men. And she had a combination where she was womanly with a manly figure type of thing. And it says that when he was with her, Vaye'aneh ota, he tortured her. If you look in Rashi, Rashi says that he was with her in an uncommon way. The reason why he was so drawn to her is because there was a weird attraction that he had to what Dinah looked like. In complete parallel, if we look at Yosef, if we go to Perek Lamed Zayin, Pasuk Bet, it says, אלה תולדות יעקב, יוסף, בן 17 שנה היה רואה את אחיו. These are the offsprings of Yaakov. These are the chronicles of Yaakov. Yaakov, and who is it? Right away it enumerates Yosef as being that one. He's 17 years old. He was the one who was also a shepherd, like his brothers. Vehu nar, and it says Vehu nar, and he's a lad, he's a youth. If you go down to Rashi, when it says Vehu nar, where are you? Okay, I have it here. Vehu nar, Rashi says, Haya metaken. Here it is. Vehu nar. Shaya oseh maaseh ne'arot. He used to behave like the girls. Metaken besa'aro. He would beautify himself. He would do his hair. Umemashmesh be'enav. And he would put makeup on his eyes. כדי שיהיה נראה יפה, in order to look pretty, in order to beautify. Who does that? Girls. So we can see that he did certain things like a girl, and Dinah did certain things like a man. Why? Because that's what happened with the, with the tefillah, with the whole thing with Dinah. Furthermore, if we go to Perek Mem Zayin, Pasuk Chaf Gimel, it says over there a very interesting pasuk that I want to share with you. It's also a good life lesson to learn this one. After Yosef got to the point of being able to store all the grain in the silos and only his got preserved. All the other people that saved for the famine, all their grain spoiled. His didn't. So everybody came to him to buy, everybody came to learn from him, his method. And one of the Pesukim right after this whole scenario is, Vayomer Yosef el Ha'am. Yosef is telling the people, Hen kaniti etchem hayom. I purchased you today, because now that they had no more food, he was able to purchase their properties, he was able to purchase their jewelry, he was able to purchase everything that they owned. They took all their money, he sold them all the food. Right now you're mine, you're my property. And I bought your real estate as well, and it all belongs to Paro. And he says, if you look at the translation for the pasuk, look, I have acquired you this day for land of Pharaoh. Here is seed for you. He lachem zera. Here is seed for you. Sow the land. He came and showed him the technique of what he did. Chazal tell us something incredible. Because if you look at the word he, it's hot, hey aleph. Can somebody tell me what that word means in Hebrew? Hey aleph? There's no such word. But here there's something cryptic. Hey is actually how you spell the letter hey. He said, hey lachem zera. He said with the letter hey, you can get seed. Meaning what? It's very well known that it's good to name the girls a name that ends with the letter hey. Why? Because it's good for them to get a zivug earlier, and also for Periya Verivya. Also for them to get to be able to have children. Notice, Avraham and Sarai couldn't have children. Avraham and Sarah, right? Once they got the hey in their name, they were able to get children, right? So it says over here, He lachem zera. When you put hey, you're going to have zera. When you have a hey in the name, you're going to be able to have children, girls that are going to be able to get pregnant and do Periya Verivya. Yosef got a hey in his name. You know there's a perek in Tehillim that says Edut leYehosef Samo. His name is Yosef, not leYehosef. But when the Malach Gabriel came and taught him all the 70 languages, he also gave him an upgrade in the letter. He says, you right now, with the upgrade of knowledge, you deserve another hey in your name. But we know that the hey belongs to who? To the girls. Hey is something that you give to a woman. Yosef also had the leYehosef Samo. The hey was added to him as well. So, see, there's enough women in the room to know that women cry and men don't. Is that a true fact? No?
Not anymore. Not as often.
Not as often? Okay, back in the days, girls used to cry and men didn't. Right? Like I always say, forgive me, there's a Pri Teshuvah. There's no crying in baseball. Remember, there was like a women's baseball team? And they were losing and they started to cry? And the coach comes out and tells them, there's no crying in baseball. So, okay, whatever. I'm trying to give you a chizuk on it. But let's just say that the women are more prone to crying because they're emotional beings. It's not an insult, ladies. It's okay. It's your makeup. Women are more emotional. Women have, are more sensitive. Where guys are a little bit less, I would say. They're more of an emotional being. So now that we have this little bit of a background about Yosef, we can ask the question again. So why did Yosef cry? Oh, I know. It was the Dinan Yosef swap. Because of that. With all that swap, certain things came up, and he had a few things that belonged to that were feminine, and she had a few things that were masculine, and one of the things that he was prone to is to be more emotional. Let's take it another level. Let's add another layer to why Yosef is crying. Last week, and my apologies to anybody who was here last week and heard this, I'm going to repeat some of last week's learning, but I'm going to take it in a different direction. So it's just, even if you heard it, you'll hear it anew. We made a comparison between Yosef and Yaakov. When Paro laid eyes on Yaakov, he was so surprised by his look. He looked so old, that he told them, Kama shenot chayecha? How old are you? And we know, I'll read you the pasuk. Vayomer Paro el Yaakov, Kama yemei shenei chayecha? Paro asked Yaakov, how old are you? Vayomer Yaakov el Paro. Yaakov replies to him, Yemei shenei megurai 30 u'me'at shana. I'm 130 years old. Me'at v'ra'im hayu yemei shenei chayai. My life was bad and difficult. Ve'lo etzigu yemei shenei chayai avotai b'yemei megureim. And they're not similar to the quality of life that my father and my grandfather used to have. The Midrash tells us on this interaction between Paro and Yaakov, when Yaakov said me'at v'ra'im hayu, that his life was bad, HaKadosh Baruch Hu replied, says, your life is bad? Ani melatiticha me'esav u'milavan והחזרתי לך דינה וגם את יוסף ואתה מתאם על חייך שמעט ורעים? With all due respect, Yaakov, what are you complaining about? You ran away from Esav that he wanted to kill you. He didn't kill you. I saved you from Esav. You lived with Lavan, the crooked one, for over 20 years. And you walked out of there as a millionaire. Lavan didn't hurt you. Dinah was taken. I brought her back to you. Yosef was abducted. He's the king of Egypt. At the end of the story, everything is a happy ending. You're complaining? The Ramban chimes in on this, and he says, ונראה כי יעקב אבינו נזרקה בו שיבה, והיה נראה זקן מאוד. He says that it seems like old age snuck up on Yaakov Avinu, and he aged extremely fast. And Paro was so amazed by his old age because he never saw people that got this old. Meaning most old people expire way before they look like this. So he thought he was maybe hundreds and hundreds of years old, let alone just 130 and looked in this shape. I never saw anybody like you in my entire kingdom. Now, it's not that Paro was picking on Yaakov. It was a genuine reaction to seeing someone that looked like Yaakov. And over here we have a beautiful explanation of what he saw. The external appearance of Yaakov. Rosho v'skano levanim kesheleg. His hair and his beard white as snow. Kmatim harabim shekisu et panav. A lot of wrinkles on his face. Haguf shafuf. His body is bent over. Panav chashuchot. He had very, like his face wasn't illuminated. It was dark. And he looked like he was extremely in pain and had a bitter life. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, in his book Sichot Musar, chimes in on this, and he says, you know why Yaakov Avinu looks like this? Because he didn't accept all his afflictions be'ava v'simcha. He didn't take all his everyday tests, trials, the tribulations that Hashem put him through with love and with happiness. He says that had he taken everything in stride with love and with acceptance and with happiness, he wouldn't look like that. He would have looked much younger. He would have looked much younger. He would have looked in much better shape. And Paro would not have asked this question. So when you see Yaakov looking the way that he did, it was a complete result of the bitterness of how he processed his life's journey. The way he accepted the afflictions of his life was in a bitter way, not by love and not by happiness, and that's why he looked at it. That's why his external appearance looked like he had a life of suffering.
He suffered a lot to be.
Yeah, we're not saying he didn't. Obviously, he had Esav, his twin brother that wants to kill him. He had Lavan, the evil father-in-law. He had his beloved Ben Zekunim, his favorite child of all, Yosef, abducted, where they told him he was murdered, that a wild animal ate him. And then after that, he had the whole thing of the abduction of Dinah, or before Dinah, then Yosef. Then after that also, that Yosef made Binyamin come. Could you imagine what he had to go through? That also Binyamin was no longer there. He had a tough life, no question. But what we're saying over here is the approach. How did he accept all of those things? In complete contrast, we came across something that is very, very interesting that I want to share with you. In Parashat Vayeshev, which we just read the pasuk, he says in Parashat Vayeshev, I'll read you the first pasuk and the first Rashi. The second pasuk. It says, El toldot Yaakov, Yosef ben 17 shana. These are the offsprings of Yaakov, and right there, stop. Who should have been? Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Issachar, Zebulun. He has at least, Dan, Asher, Naphtali, Gad. Then Yosef. He's number 11. Why is it when you tell me Ele Toldot Yaakov, you give me that Yosef is first? Rashi tells us, Kol ma she'era, and Rashi is quoting Bereshit Rabbah, which I brought Bereshit Rabbah to read directly from inside, because Rashi just gives us an excerpt and says V'chulei. I'm going to read the V'chulei for you. All the etc. the ones mentioned over here. It says, Kol ma she'era li Yaakov, ira li Yosef. Every single thing that happened to Yaakov happened to Yosef. I'm going to read this for you from the inside. But we'll just stop here. If everything that happened to Yaakov happened to Yosef, then that means that Yosef, at the end of his life, should look like who? Like Yaakov. Let's see. What does it say in Bereshit Rabbah? I'll say it in Hebrew, then I'll go back and I'll summarize in English. Okay? Ele toldot Yaakov. These are the El toldot Yaakov. Reuven. It should have said Reuven. This is the offspring of Yaakov. It should Reuven. Ela ma Talmud lomar Yosef. Why is it coming to say Yosef first instead of Reuven first? Ela kol ma she'era leze era leze. Everything that happened to Yaakov happened to Yosef. Ma ze nolad mahul, av ze nolad mahul. Ma ze imo akara, av zo imo akara. Ma ze imo yalda shnayim, av ze imo yalda shnayim. Ma ze bechor, av ze bechor. מה זה נתקשת עמו בלידה? אז זה נתקשת עמו בשעת לידה. מה זה אחיו שונא אותו? אף זה אחיו שונאים אותו. מה זה אחיו ביקש להורגו? אף זה ביקשו אחיו להורגו. מה זה רואה? אף זה רואה. זה נסתם וזה נסתם. זה נגנב 2 פעמים וזה נגנב 2 פעמים. זה נתברך בעושר וזה נתברך בעושר. זה יצא לחוצה הארץ וזה יצא לחוצה לארץ. זה נשא אישה מחוצה לארץ וזה נשא אישה מחוץ לארץ. זה הוליד בנים בחוץ לארץ, וזה הוליד בנים בחוץ לארץ. זה ליוו מלאכים, וזה ליוו מלאכים. זה נתגדל על ידי חלום, וזה נתגדל על ידי חלום. זה נתברך בית חמי בשבילו, וזה נתברך בית חמי בשבילו. זה ירד למצרים, וזה ירד למצרים. זה קילה את הרעב, וזה קילה את הרעב. זה משביע, וזה משביע. זה מצווה, וזה מצווה. זה מת במצרים, וזה מת במצרים. זה נחנד וזה נחנד. זה אלו עצמותיו וזה אלו עצמותיו. It's unbelievable the comparisons in their lives. I'll say it in English. They were both born circumcised. They both had mothers that were originally barren. They couldn't have children. Yaakov's mother gave birth to 2 children. Yosef's mother gave birth to 2 children. Yosef is the Bechor, Yaakov is the Bechor, firstborn. Yosef's mother had complications for giving birth, and Yaakov's mother also gave complications when she was giving birth. Yaakov's brother hated him. Esav hated him. Yosef's brothers hated him. Esav wanted to kill Yaakov. The brothers wanted to kill Yosef. He was a sheep herder, and he was a sheep herder. Yosef got the blessing to be wealthy. Yaakov got the blessing to be wealthy. This one went from Eretz Canaan lechutz haaretz to Egypt. Yosef also went to Egypt. He had children in chutz haaretz, outside of the land of Israel. So did Yosef. The angels escorted him, and angels escorted him. The dream that Yaakov had is the dream that elevated him, and the dream that Yosef had is the dream that elevated him. Yosef's father-in-law became rich because of him, and Yaakov's father-in-law became rich because of him. Lavan and Potiphar. Yosef went down to Egypt. Yaakov went down to Egypt. Yaakov is the one that stopped the famine, and Yosef himself also had the power to stop the famine. Yosef died in Egypt. Yaakov died in Egypt. Yosef and Yaakov both were embalmed in Egypt, and both their bones were taken to be buried outside of Egypt to the land of Israel. So many similarities, so many things are identical. Surely, after 130 years, what should Yosef look like? Exactly like Yaakov, which is what? Old, tired, wilted, super aged. But that wasn't the case. That's not the case. Yosef did not look like Yaakov at the end of his life. And why was that? Why doesn't Yosef age the same way of his father if they are Ma she'era lezeh era lezeh? They've been twinning their entire life. How is it possible that at the end there's a different result? Because Yosef cried. Yaakov held it in. Yaakov took all the suffering and he held it in, and at the end, when you hold in all the suffering, it shows on your face. Yosef had a different approach. He let the pain out. He cried it out. And it was healthy. He didn't age because of that. Or he didn't age like his father. The crying was a release. It didn't affect him like it did Yaakov. As a matter of fact, I looked up the science of crying, and it says that when a person cries, what happens is there's a release of oxytocin and endogenous opioids. In other words, they're endorphins. What's an endorphin? It's a feel-good chemical. When you cry, your body chemically makes endorphins, which are feel-good chemicals. Why? Because they ease physical and emotional pain. Crying eases physical and emotional pain. Yosef released. Yaakov held it in. On a deeper level, let's analyze Yosef's tears. There's 8 times in the past few parashiot that it mentions the crying of Yosef. It's as if we just learned right now broad strokes. You know why Yosef cries a lot? That story with Dinah. Oh, you know why Yosef cries a lot? Because he lets it out. He has a different approach. Some people hold it in. Some people let it out. He's a crier. He doesn't hold it in. That's broad stroke. It's okay. It's also good to learn it like that. It could be as simple as that. This next layer of our learning is going to be deeper. We're going to go into each time that he cried, and we're going to dissect it. And we're going to see, why did he cry, and what type of a cry was it? What was the effect? What was the reason? What was the effect? Let's analyze it. I don't want to give away too much. Because there's more beneath the surface than just an over-emotional man having a good cry, right? We don't want to have Yosef like he's just an over-emotional guy that needs a good cry every once in a while. That's Yosef. That's not Yosef. It's Yosef a tzaddik. Yosef HaTzadik, he was an avrech. You know what's an avrech? They told him, Av bechokma rach b'shanim. Which means what? He had the ability to become an Av. He was almost the fourth patriarch. So, I don't want you to get an image of a weak individual that cries. It's Yosef HaTzadik. In a minute we'll see a more sophisticated level, a more sophisticated understanding of why Yosef cried. Yosef cried 8 times. Or 8 times for what's mentioned in the Torah. And each time it was for a different reason. Before we go deep into it, let's ask a question. Why do we cry? Why do people cry?
Because they suffer.
Okay, that's one. People cry because they suffer.
Happy.
People cry because they're happy.
Right. But he
People cry because they're emotional. Very good, emotional. Because they're hurt. Very good. So you can see that just like the way human emotions are very complex. We're going to focus in just on the crying, but we cry for many different reasons. Kids cry because they don't get their way. Kids cry because they get hurt.
Sometimes they cry because they get the stuff they want.
They use it as a ploy, right? They go. I call those kids pliers. They know how to put pressure on their parents.
Exactly.
I looked into it and I found a whole menu of reasons of why people cry. People cry because of sorrow. People cry because they're happy. People cry because they're mourning somebody's death. People cry because they are extremely elated, osher, meaning they have a tremendous amount of joy. People cry because they're having a breakdown. People cry because they're extremely emotional. People cry because they're very excited. People cry because of a broken heart. People cry because of things that don't make sense to them. People cry because they are defeated. People cry because they feel like they're a failure. People cry because they want to come back to a better place. We call that teshuvah, by the way. Psychiatrists say better place, we say teshuvah. People cry because they're lonely. People cry because they yearn to be connected to another person. And that could be a friend and that could be a soulmate. People cry for a connection. The
when
crying...
a couple gets separated, the woman or the husband will cry.
Correct, because there's a void. People cry because they're lacking.
Exactly.
And we can see that we can apply almost all, by the end of this class, we'll be able to apply all these reasons to why Yosef cried. Even though that we could categorize him as being predisposed to be an emotional guy, emotional man. However, when he cried appropriately and for the right reasons. He wasn't just bawling because he lost control of his feelings, right? He wasn't being a girl about it. I was waiting for tomatoes and I'm just playing with you guys. Don't be girls. So we see that there are different reasons why people cry. Let's think about it again on a broad stroke level, just like to get a background understanding. Why would Yosef want to cry? Right? Let me look into his life and see if there's a reason why Yosef had a reason to cry. Well, let's think about it. At 17 years old, he is thrown out of his house. He's hated by his family. And the Pesukim say that he was sanu, hated by his brothers. So much that his own family, brothers, not one, not two. You might have like a siksuch, maybe not getting along with one or two of your family members. We're talking about close to every single one of his brothers says, you, I can't stand you. I can't say hello to you. So much that they did what? Throw him into a pit. What kind of a pit? Not just a pit, just a holding cell. Nachashim v'akravim, snakes and scorpions. Snakes only, they say that snakes, they only bite if you sin. The snakes don't bite if you don't sin. There's a reason why snake bites. Scorpions have no reason. Scorpions, any scorpion that said, they go without any reason. So he was in the danger zone. And they said that pit was filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of snakes and scorpions. Not one or two just crawling around and he's just like on one side chewing away. Bush and Nachashim v'akravim. After they threw him in that pit, they said, no, what? Let's take him out and sell him for $2. Throwing him in the pit, what does that do for us? Let's gain. Imagine your brother selling you for $2. After he was sold by Ishmaelim and this whole tirtur of them going from one, from his brothers all the way to being sold and being taken down to Egypt. Once he's in Egypt, they put him on top of a pedestal. A human being for sale. Who wants this human being for sale? Could you imagine? A 17-year-old that looks, by the way, a stunning 17-year-old. A beautiful specimen of what a man is. Right in Egypt. Egypt where? That 9 kabin shel tum'ah, 10 kabin shel tum'ah yarda la'olam, 9 לקחה מצרים. 9/10, 90% of the impurities of the entire world was in this little area called Egypt. You throw a kid like that in there, right away they make him a sex slave, or they make him into that area where all there's prostitution. Perfect guy for there. Put him over there. Could you imagine? What do you think those people are thinking about? Why do you think Potiphar took him? Potiphar took him because he wanted to be with him. Potiphar was a homosexual. He wanted Yosef for himself. So imagine Yosef is living a reality where Potiphar is chasing him and Potiphar's wife is chasing him. Potiphar's wife was more aggressive, as we learned in previous classes. So he went from rags to riches. He was living in the royal family of Yaakov with all the money in the world to being a slave and being chased by Potiphar and his wife. Pushing them off for a full year, he gets thrown into jail. You know what jail looked like back in the days? They called it a bet sohar. The word sohar comes from the word tzohar. The tzaddik and the samech are replaceable in the Hebrew language. Or if you're Syrian, they don't say that tzaddik and samech is the same thing, right? But the sahola, the samecha, right? The tzaddik is a samech. The tzohar in Hebrew means window. Back in the days, the prison used to be a long pit with a tzohar, with a window on top. Like that old school thing, solitary confinement. Throw him in the pit and a window on top. So they threw him into something like that for 10 years plus 2. With everything that I told you, with all these terrible life experiences, not one tear. He didn't cry once. Not one time did he cry. This is a very tough individual. We're seeing a completely different lens right now from what we learned before. Before it looked a little weak, right? A little bit feminine, right? Not at all. Not at all at all. Yosef HaTzadik was a spiritual giant, a gibor. All the 12 tribes were giborim. He didn't cry now one time for any of these instances. But if we go to Perek Mem Bet, Pasuk Chavdalet, we go to the first time that Yosef cries. And we start our analysis. To give you some background before we go to the Pasuk, Perek Mem Bet, Pasuk Chavdalet. Yosef is now the viceroy, the king of Egypt, second in command to Paro. He has his brothers being held, being when you're not, what is it called? Yeah, being held. What is it called when you're not arrested but you're being held? Being held, right? For being suspected to be meraglim.
Detained.
You're detained. Thank you. The brothers are detained. Why? He tells them, "You guys, where are you from?" Because you have to understand, they look different. They don't look like the typical Egyptian. They're big. They're strong. Their complexion is different from the people of Egypt. The way they dressed. Everybody in Egypt is walking around with one little silk, or not silk, like linen tunic. They're dressed with sniut. They're walking through the door and they're noticeable. So everybody's noticing them. Not only that, Egypt had you can come into Egypt through 10 different gates. When they walked in, you know what they said? They said, maybe we'll find Yosef. Maybe he's alive. Let's each one take a gate and take a look. And you know where you go? Go to where all the Zima is. He was so beautiful, for sure they got him over there. So each one came in through a different gate. Yosef tells them, you guys are spies. You came to spy on the land. I'm detaining you. And not only that, who was the first one to throw him into the pit? Shimon. He tells them, Shimon, I'm holding you. Because they started to tell him the story. No, we just came to break bread. We came to get food for our family. Here's our father. Our father is old. He's suffering. He tells a story of how he lost one son. He has another baby boy. It's, he has a baby boy? Okay. You're a liar. And if you're telling me, if everything you tell me is true, go bring me that baby boy that you speak of. He knows the baby boy is Binyamin. There's a bunch of things happening here behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, he says, you know what? I demand you bring Binyamin. I'll read the Pesukim to you, just so you can get the background. But you should know that even though as Yosef is plotting this whole thing with his brothers, you should understand that also he's arranging their tikkun. Shimon, you threw me into the pit. Go into the pit so you get cleaned up on that. Brothers, you gave up on me. Fight for Binyamin so you get cleaned up on that. Every single thing that he did was what? Is to clean them up from some sin that they did before. He was doing everything in their favor. It's just a side note that you should know. That everything that he's doing is just he custom picked each one to do one thing or the other to clean them up of what they did previously to him. Could you imagine? This is the first time he's laying eyes on his brothers. He doesn't have a bone of revenge in him. Not even nothing. He's not seeking revenge. He doesn't want to punish his brothers. He doesn't even want to yell at them. He wants to help them do a tikkun as soon as he sees them. That's Yosef. But we're learning about his crying. What leads up to the first time that Yosef is crying, and why did he cry? So let's start. Chaf Aleph to Chaf Dalet. So they're in this mess, the brothers. Vayomru ish el achiv. So now the brothers are talking to each other. Ashemim anachnu. We're guilty. Al achinu asher hayinu tzayat nafsho. You know why we're guilty? Because of our brother. We saw him suffering. Beitchaneno elenu. He begged us. Don't do this. Don't put me in the pit. Don't sell me. Velo shamanu. We didn't listen to him. Al ken ba'alenu atzara azot. This is why this problem has come upon us. By the way, you know what this is? This is the classic example of mepashpesh b'ma'asav. You know what's mepashpesh b'ma'asav? Teshuvah. What's teshuvah? When something is wrong, and you don't know why, why do I have this problem? Why are things wrong in my life? You know what you have to do? You have to stop. You have to stop and sit and think. Why? What did I do? Let me go back. Who did I hurt? Who did I lie to? Did I do something wrong to this person? Did I speak something negatively to that individual? You have to go until, bah, there it is. That's what they did. They saw, what is this big problem? We came here to get food. It's like we went to the supermarket, they got us detained over here by the police. What happened? You know what happened? They went, pishpeshu b'ma'asehem, and it says, Ashemim anachnu, we're guilty. It's because of Yosef. Continues the internal conversation. Vayan Reuven otam lemor, halo amarti lachem. Reuven tells them, I told you so. Reuven tells them, I told you not to do this. Al techteu bayeled, don't sin with this boy. Velo shamatem. You didn't listen to me. V'gam damo hineni drash. Now we have to, his blood is being requested. Meaning, because he's no longer around, he's probably dead. So Hashem is the great equalizer. Hashem is now going to want us to, we have a debt with Hashem, the blood of Yosef. This was what's going on over here. I told you to leave him alone. V'hem lo yadu ki yishomea Yosef. And they didn't know that Yosef is listening because they didn't know it was Yosef. They thought it was somebody else. It was an Egyptian. Ki ha-melitz benotehem. Also he had an interpreter. The melitz is the interpreter. And he was sitting between them. He was the metargem benehem. And here is the first pasuk of Yosef crying. Vayisov ma'alehem vayevki. He turns around and he starts to cry. He turns his head and he starts to cry. Vayashev alehem vayedaber elahem vayikach mitam et Shimon. He comes back to them, he speaks to them, and he takes Shimon. Vayaser oto leonehem. He takes him and he incarcerates Shimon and he sends him away. Go bring me your baby brother that you speak of. Okay, why did Yosef cry for the first time? Madua bacha Yosef. The first time that Yosef cried, Rashi says, Lefi sheshama she'hu mitcharetim. He's overhearing them saying that they're sorry, that they regretted doing it. So first things first, he's happy that his brothers regretted the mistake that they made. Sheshama she'hu mitcharetim. Furthermore, the Radak says, Ki shama she'hitvadu alav. That what? They're willing to do teshuvah in order to rectify what they did with him. Sforno says, you know why Yosef was crying? Yosef bacha kasher ra'a betzaratam. He saw his own brothers in trouble. He felt bad for them. He's like, look at my brothers going through trouble. I don't want to see my brothers like this. It was hard for him to see his brothers in trouble. So he cried. Ma'am Noez gives us a little bit more Hollywood style behind the scenes of that moment. I'm going to share it with you. It says, Vayisov ma'aleim vayef, that he turned away and he cried. He says over here that he actually took a few steps away from them. He distanced himself and he cried. Why? He says, look at this. They're having a change of heart. They're sorry for what they did. And he took Shimon from them. And why did he take Shimon? Because he's the one that threw him into the pit. And the reason also why he took Shimon is because he wanted to separate him from Levi. Because you know what happens when Shimon and Levi get together. They're trouble. Right? So he says, let me first separate Shimon and Levi. When those two get together, they're able to, turn Egypt upside down. Let me separate them. So now Shimon is held captive. And Shimon is now talking to the brothers. The same way that Yosef was talking. Pay attention. It's like the roles got reversed. Shimon talks to the tribes. Look. The same thing they did to Yosef, look, this Egyptian is trying to do to me right now. Midah keneged midah. Measure for measure. Because you listened to Yehuda that gave you the advice to sell him. I didn't agree to it. It's better if we would have killed him and not sold him as an Eved. Why? Why is it better to be dead than be sold as a slave? Shashevi kashemi namavet. Being held as captive is more difficult than being dead. Could you imagine the 200 plus captives that we have right now, what they're going through? It's a worse feeling than death. So Shimon turns to his brothers and he tells them, how are you leaving me over here? בבית asurim in jail, וללכת הביתה to go home. So his brothers answer him, מה אתה רוצה שנעשה? What do you want us to do? שנלך לביתנו ולבני ביתנו למות מרעב? He says, what do you want? There's no food, there's famine. If we don't come back home with some food, how are the kids going to live? How's Abba going to live? Go to jail, we'll take the food, we'll feed the kids, we'll come back for you. He says, שאם לא, כן היינו כולנו מוסים נפשנו עבורך. He says, if it wasn't for the famine, if it wasn't that we needed the food, you know what I would do? We would fight for you, we'd release you. But there's a famine. The famine means that we have to bring food back to our family. Shimon understands that point and he tells them, go ahead, do what you need to do. And he says, ואני רוצה לראות מי יהיה מסוגל לשים אותי בבית הסוהרים. Let me see who can put me in jail. Now he's a tough guy, right? Let me see who could put me in jail right now. At that very moment, Yosef sends a message to Paro to send him 70 of his strongest men. He says that a few thieves entered the kingdom, and he wants to capture them and put them in handcuffs. And when the 70 strong men from Paro came, Yosef tells them, "Simu ta'ish hazeh betoch bet hasohar." Put this guy in jail. When they came close to Shimon, Shimon let out like a roar, like a yell, like a scream that was so strong that all the 70 strong men fell on their faces. And they fell to the floor and they started to tremble and shake, like they heard the roar of a lion. They zoem meod. So could you imagine? They come to take Shimon to jail. They can. The 70 strongest men in Egypt, he yelled out some sort of a scream or some sort of a yell, and they fell to the ground shaking. Leave us alone. Now what? Yosef tells his son Menashe, put him in jail. Menashe gets up and gives him a whack on his head. He bends him over, he grabs him, and he puts him into the jail and puts him in handcuffs. Just goes to show you, because they're the progeny of Yaakov, they're all Hazakim, the son of Yosef. Yosef was strong. And the sons of Yosef were strong. These were not little featherweights. They had the strength of the Shevatim. We know they're like X-Men. They're like superheroes. The type of superpowers that they had. And they tell them, "Zeh tzarich liot asur po, ad shedaber devechem emet." This guy needs to stay here until we see what they, their claim that they have a baby brother, if it's true. So we see that the first cry that Yosef had was emotionally stirred. Well, where did it come from? My brothers regret what they did to me. They're sorry. Sometimes you get into a fight, you feel like the other person is always against you. He hates me. He'll never change. When you just hear the other person wants to make up, or the other person is sorry, you soften up. You're open to talk to him again. I don't know if you've ever been to a fight. Anybody ever been to a fight? When the other side softens up? Anybody married here? When the wife softens up a little bit and all of a sudden shalom bayit happens? Or sometimes when the husband finally gets off of mute and starts to talk, and all of a sudden they start to talk again, and all of a sudden that's what it is. And so much, she's sorry. You know what? Things are different. He was emotionally stirred. And that when that emotion stirred in him that his brothers were sorry, he felt like it was proper to cry about that. It stirred his heart. And that was the first reason that he cried. We go to Perek Mem Gimel, Pasuk Lamed. Mem Gimel Pasuk Lamed. This is the part where Yosef sees Binyamin for the first time. Also, a very emotionally charged moment. It says, I'll read the pasuk before. Vayisa enav vayared Binyamin. He lifts up his eyes and there he is. His brother Binyamin is there. Vayared Binyamin achiv ben imo. He saw Binyamin, his brother, the one that comes from his mother. Vayomer hazeh achichem hakaton asher amartem elai. It's not playing the role. Is this the baby brother that you speak of? Vayomer Elohim echoncha beni. And Yosef tells him, he's speaking directly to Binyamin, Elohim yechoncha beni. Yeah, like some sort of like a greeting that he told him. Let's see how they did. God be gracious to you, my son. Okay. I'm going to read Pasuk Lamed and then we'll dig into this. Vayimaher Yosef, and all of a sudden Yosef, as soon as he saw him, immediately hurried. Why? Because all of a sudden this emotion came over him. Something snuck up on him, like this emotion. Something came over him. This like mercy or these feelings that he had towards his brother. And he felt like he wanted to cry. He went to the room. He excused himself now to a room and he cried. Okay, this is cry number 2. His first reaction, if you see what the pasuk tells us, is that he started to tear up. He had like something was starting to build up. Why? It says, Ki nechmeru rachamav. It says, נתעורר חום הלב השולח עדים אל המוח עד שעיניים זולקות דמעה. Did you ever get this physical reaction when you're about to cry or when you're about to get emotional? All of a sudden your body temperature rises and all of a sudden you got like the blood rushes to your head and all of a sudden your eyes start to tear up? No?
Yeah. When there's fever, when there is fever.
Huh?
High fever.
Oh, well, so if you've ever experienced that,
Yeah.
that's what happened to Yosef. Something started to build up inside of him. He felt like all this heat coming up to his head. He started to feel warm. His eyes started to water up, and he said, "Excuse me." And he went like right away to the left, found the room, and started to cry. Matok Haor, where are you? This one. This is an interesting one. It says, Rabbi Zalman Swordskin from the book Oznaim LaTorah says that the reason why Yosef cried, because through his conversation to his brothers, he discovered that his grandfather is dead, that Yitzchak is dead. And because he heard that Yitzchak, his grandfather, died, he had this emotional stir up, and that's why he wanted to cry about it. Where do we get that from? Because Yosef asked them, Hashalom avichem hazaken. He could have said, Hashalom avichem, how's your father doing? That would be Yaakov. When he said, Hashalom avichem hazaken, how is your father, the older one, doing? He meant the grandfather. So when he said Avichem Ibn Zaken, he meant Yitzchak Avinu. So when he found out that Yitzchak was dead, his emotions took over him. I thought that was a very interesting one. Me'am Loez once again opens up to us something very, very interesting I want to share with you. It says he sees Binyamin for the first time. They start a conversation. This conversation, you can find it in depth in Midrash Tanchuma. He tells them, Binyamin, nice to meet you. You have a brother from your mother? I see you're all brothers. But do you have a brother that is from your mother? He tells him, Ach hayali v'ni yoda echanu. He says they used to have one brother from the same mother, and I don't know where he is. Yosef asks him, do you have any children? He tells him, yeah, I got 10 boys. And he tells them, you want to know what their names are? He says, yeah, what's their names? He tells them, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Echi, Rosh, Mupim, Chupim, Ard. Yosef tells them, what are these names? I have never in my life heard such strange names. Ma Pesha Shemot Elu Astumim. What is the meaning of these names? Binyamin answers him, Karati otam al shem achi she'avar. I named every single one of my children after my long-lost brother. Yosef starts, what? What did you say? You had 10 children? You had 10 this is in his mind, right? What is he saying?
Yeah.
You had 10 children? Every Brit Milah, when it came to the name, Vishket Shemo Yisrael, what are you going to call his name? You named a name after me? That's what he's thinking. You thought about me? You care about me? You love me? He tells him, I named my children after my long-lost brother, and let me tell you what each name means. He says, Bela, shenivla ben haumot v'ni yoda echanu. He says the word Bela, is the name Bela, is because he got swallowed again, amongst the nations, and I can't find him. I don't know where he is. My second son, I called him Becher. You know why I called him Becher? Because my brother was Bechor to his mother. I'm the young one. Eshbel, you know why I called him Eshbel? Sheshavo El. That Hashem made him captive. Gera, Shaya Geret Bet Nochia, he became a convert, a foreign citizen in a foreign land. So I have a son named Gera to remind me that my brother is in that situation. Naaman, Shaya Naim Beoter. I called him Naaman because he was extremely pleasant, Naim. Echi Varosh, you know why I called my children Echi Varosh? Because he was Achi Haya Veroshi. He was my brother and he was the top for me. He was everything to me. Mupim, Shelamad Harbe Torah Mipi Avi. He learned. Why is it called the Mupim? Because he learned a lot of Torah from the mouth of my father. Vechupim Shelo Raiti Chupato. And the reason why I called my son Chupim is because I never saw his wedding, and he never saw mine. What a brother! This Binyamin, huh? Imagine having an akh like this. Continues to say, "Umiyom shene'elam lo sirakti roshi v'nahagti ke'avel." He says, and from the day that he was gone, I never brushed my hair, and I acted like a mourner. Erd, he says, you know why I called him Erd? Shorid me'ir le'ir ufanav hayu domim levered. Erd is because he went from city to city, from province to province, and his face always looked like a rose. And he says that from the day that my brother disappeared, my father didn't sleep on a bed not one night. He slept on the floor every single night. And every single time that I see my brothers, that every single one of my brothers has a partner. You know, brothers and sisters, you know, sometimes there's two that connect and they're very tight. Sometimes there's two brothers that are tighter than some of the other brothers. He says all of them are connected. I'm alone. I don't have anyone. I don't have וזולגות עיניי הרבה דמעות מרות, and my eyes are constantly in tears, bitter tears, that I don't have my long lost brother next to me. When Yosef heard these sad words, he couldn't control his emotions, and he says, let me cry. He excused himself and he went to cry.
I would cry too.
That's unbelievable.
What we have over here is some emotions of closure and some emotions of joy. This is a cry of joy and an emotional cry. With his brothers telling them that they are sorry for throwing him, for the brothers for Yosef hearing that the brothers are sorry for throwing him in the pit. It brought him back to that traumatic experience of being in the pit, and there's closure there. The people that did bad to me are sorry. You know, people will go to therapists and to psychiatrists just to get to this point where the psychiatrists tell them they'll forgive you if they were alive. You know, if your parents were here, they'd forgive you. You have to let it go. This is real life. This is real life. The brother is saying, we're sorry we did it. It's closure. It's closure to a traumatic experience. And what's happening over here is this whole feeling that he felt lost, betrayed, unloved. All of a sudden he says, no. My father loves me. He sleeps on the floor because I'm not next to him. My brother loves me. He doesn't name a child without thinking about me. My brothers still care about me. They still come into the city looking for me. He's starting to have closure. These are good cries. We go to number 3. Perek Memhei.
So my question is,
Yes.
if they would not have acted like this, you know, regretting, would he have cried?
You would never know.
I think it's,
You never know.
I think he would.
Okay. So it's an opinion, but we never know. We're right now just studying the Pesukim, whatever the Pesukim tell us, and we're trying to learn the lessons from there. The what ifs. Because there's tons of what ifs, who knows? But through learning his character, through learning, how do you know a person? Through their actions. When people talk, talk is cheap, right? Because anybody can tell you who they are, what they want to be, what they can be, what they're going to do. That's all talk. What defines a person? Their actions. So we try to learn from their actions because that's who they are. And through their actions we can say this is their character. Memhei, Pasuk Aleph and Pasuk Bet. Velo, this is cry number 3. This is the big reveal. This is Yosef can't control himself anymore. His brothers, all his brothers are in front of him, and he wants to finally tell them, I am Yosef. Velo yachol Yosef litapek. He can't hold himself back any longer. Lechol nitzavim alav, for all the people that are standing in attendance, because it wasn't just his brothers. It was all the Egyptian personnel that were in the room as well. Vaikra, he calls all the people. Hotziu kol ish ma'alai. Clear the house. I don't want nobody in front of me. Velo amad ishito. There was nobody there, meaning no Egyptian was there. Bitvada Yosef Erechav. When Yosef finally reveals himself to his brothers that he is Yosef. Vaiten et kolo bevechi. And there he is. He let out a huge wail of a cry. Vaishmu Mitzrayim, Vaishma bet Paro. All of Egypt heard it, and even the house of Pharaoh heard that Yosef is crying. What's going on over here? Let's go back to Mefarshei Pshat. It says that Velo yachal Yosef litapek. Yosef couldn't hold himself back. What does that mean? Targum Yonatan tells us, Shelo yachal lisbol shelo lifkot. He couldn't control himself. An uncontrollable feeling to cry came over him and he couldn't control. Sometimes you can hold back a tear. Sometimes you could almost fight it, right? This was uncontrollable. And he says that he doesn't want anybody to see him crying, so he clears the house right away because he was in a state of uncontrollable desire to cry. And he says not only that, he couldn't control himself. And why was he wanting to cry? Because of the mercy of his brothers. He didn't want his brothers to be in this situation. Meaning, sometimes you see, God forbid, that we should never see, but imagine you see a family member or a good friend or somebody or a child of yours going through something harsh. Go see a mother when her kid just falls in the middle of a yard and scrapes a knee. She cries more than him, right? So imagine when something like the fate of 12 brothers is on the line, that they're going to go to jail, killed, whatever it is. He feels bad that they're in this situation because they now believe that they're in big trouble because of allegedly being thieves or allegedly liars or allegedly spies. He can't stand to see his brothers in that situation. He wants to cry. Furthermore, it says Vayikra in the pasuk. It says Velo yachol Yosef litapek lechol tzavim alav Vayikra. The Mefarshim here, the Ramban says, why does it say Vayikra? You could have said the word Vayomer. Vayomer means to tell. What's Vayikra? Vayikra means you're saying it in a very loud voice. So the Ramban is saying something interesting over here. She'erin kolo becha'as v'amar l'msharatav hotziu kol ish ma'alai. He said it angrily. Take all the servants over here because he was so adamant on his brothers not being embarrassed. Imagine everything remember the beginning of the class what we said they did to him? With all the things they did to him, what was he worried about? My brothers don't get embarrassed. No way. Get out of here, all of you. Continues to say, it says all this happened because he couldn't, the Malbim says, he couldn't control himself from crying. And all this, for like Rashi says, that he didn't want his brothers to be embarrassed. He had respect for his brothers. At the end of the day, he respected his older brothers. There's a lot to be said for the respect of yesteryears. The way the kids used to respect their parents. Brothers, a younger brother respecting their older brother. I've seen younger brothers respect older brothers like the older brother is a father. I've seen households where Baruch Hashem, they were blessed with
10 children.
10 children. The younger one pulls the chair for the older one. The younger one pulls the chair for the older one on the Shabbat table.
Yeah.
You know how beautiful it is to see that?
Yes.
That the younger one honors the older one. As a matter of fact, there's a special tefillah that we say on Rosh Chodesh Sivan of the Shla Kadosh, the tefillah that we talk about, that we pray for our children. It's customary to say it once a year. Rosh Chodesh Sivan. There's some that say it on a weekly basis, monthly basis, daily basis, depending. Praying for your children. It's good to pray for your children. In that prayer, if you pay close attention, because it's a prayer that's more than 3-4 pages long, sometimes you tune out after the first paragraph. One of the words, one of the lines over there is that the younger siblings honor the older siblings. You can see it over here. Yosef never lost that chshuma. If there's any Moroccan term, kataf chshuma.
Shuma. No.
Translation.
Shuma, they had respect for one another. He was still embarrassed from his older brothers. Furthermore, when it said that all of Mitzrayim heard it, it says, "Hamitzrim she'atzu ma'abayit shamu kol habechi." Those Egyptians that he told to leave heard Yosef crying. And they started to say, Yosef is crying, Yosef is crying, Yosef is crying, Yosef is crying. Did you hear about this? Yosef is crying. Like gossip. It went from person to person to person to person until it came all the way to the house of Paro. And they come to Paro. Paro, did you hear? Yosef boche. Yosef is crying. So all of a sudden now it's publicized. The whole Egypt knows that Yosef is crying. The Abarbanel says also on this that this bechi that he had, you might think that it was a bechi of ahava, a bechi out of love, a cry of love, a cry of caring. However, it wasn't really that. He says you can't categorize it as a cry that comes from love or from adoration. It's a cry that he wanted to show the Egyptians the kavod he's giving his brothers, the ma'alah he's giving to his brothers. Incredible. Meaning he could have kept this cry private. He could have gone to a cellar. He could have gone to a room. Why was it so loud that everybody hears? He wanted the whole Egypt to see Yosef, the viceroy of Egypt, is honoring his brothers by crying. He loves them so much. He cares for them so much. That's why he did it in such a loud voice. And it was difficult for him to be separated from them. And this entire time we were separated from him, it was a torture for him. And that's why he did it in a loud voice, out of respect for his brothers. I saw another interesting chidush on why, on this particular number 3 cry of Yosef. Says that the reason why all of Egypt heard it, all of the ministers of Paro and his servants, because Yosef, on a much, much higher spiritual level, and this is something that we would expect Yosef to cry for, Yada shalidei ridat achiv leMitzrayim matchila galut Mitzrayim. He says he knew that now that all his brothers are here in Egypt, the exile has begun. The galut started. Veisbelu Yisrael sevel rav ad asher tavo geulatam, and they're going to suffer. They're going to suffer in Egypt for many, many years until the redemption that comes by the hand of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, led by Moshe. VeYosef vitpaleh al kol zerah Yaakov. And Yosef cried, and in this cry he connected a tefillah that the entire progeny of Yaakov, all the tribes, be safe as they are enslaved in Egypt. And what was his prayer? What was he crying in his tefillah? Shelo yitarvu ben hagoyim velo yevedu la'ad. They shouldn't intermingle. They shouldn't intermarry. That there should be no assimilation. That the family of Yaakov not marry goyim, not marry Egyptians. He was crying because now that his family is there, they're in the danger zone. And he knows that they were going to be suffering. But above all, what was he worried about? No assimilation. We spoke a few weeks ago about assimilation, the whole thing of how dangerous it is, the environment of Yaakov, and you say, well, that here's another layer to that. He was so worried about that. So we see over here that maybe this cry was a little bit on a higher level, that Yosef cried over here because of the exile, because of the galut, because of the future of his family. And why is it good to cry for the future of your family? At the end of the class, we'll answer that. But sometimes it's good to cry for the future of your family. We'll put that on the shelf, we'll visit it again. So, number 4. The 4th time that Yosef cried. Perek Memhei. Pasuk Yudalet to Tedvav. This is such a good learning. I don't know if you're enjoying it, but I'm telling you, I'm loving it. And I'll tell you why. It's deep learning. If there's one good lesson you're going to have in your life, is that you went into layers and layers and layers of understanding why Yosef is crying. Every once in a while, it's good to not just be in the fluff. To get deep into the nitty-gritty of why things are happening. It's good. This is a good lesson to have.
You know, you want to know all the psychological of these of the people in the time.
It helps you understand.
Yes, exactly.
It helps you feel. It helps you connect.
Right.
Okay, Perek Memhei, Pasuk Yudalet and Tetvav. I'll read you the Pesukim. What's happening over here? So after the big reveal of Yosef revealing to his brothers that he is Yosef and he is the viceroy of Egypt, and he extends the invitation to his father Yaakov to come, for the entire family to come. He'll take care of them. And they finally come to Pasuk Yudalet, and he says, ויפול על צווארי בנימין אחיו, ויבך, ובנימין בכה על צוואריו. Meaning that now they all have to go back home to bring back their entire family. So as they're departing, right, this is a departing cry. Do you ever go to the airport with somebody you're not going to see for a very long time? You know that crying in the airport? You know when that happened? In the 80s and the 90s, when, like I remember, when we moved from Israel to Brooklyn, New York, we would have, family members that would come once every 5 years, once every 8 years. You know what is seen at the airport? You know the hugs and the crying and the letting go and the, to the last second. It's not like today. Today it's more accessible. It's more affordable. Back in the day, a goodbye was a goodbye. And to keep in touch wasn't FaceTime. What phones? It was like rotary. Maybe you'll catch him at home. We used to communicate with letters. You know how we stepped up our game? We would buy 60-minute cassettes, and the entire family would sit around this tape recorder, and we would press record, and each one would take turns saying, "Grandma, I love you and I miss you, and I got 85 on the test, and I have blue jeans, and I can't wait till you come for my bar mitzvah. When you come, can you make those Moroccan cookies? Okay, your turn." And then my sister would talk, and my mother would talk, and my father would talk, and we would send a cassette. And like a month later, a cassette would show up, and we'd press play, and it's everyone. It's the aunts and the uncles and the grandmas. She's crying on the tape. Ah! That's how we used to communicate. A goodbye was a goodbye. You know how we said goodbye to my grandfather at the airport, or to my grandmother at the airport, or to my uncle, or when we went to Israel, or we came back to America, like after a trip, after you connected to everybody. It was really emotionally draining. It was a goodbye. Similarly here, that's what's happening over here. There's a goodbye. They're departing, right? They connected. They had such a good bond. They sat down. They ate. They drank. They bonded. They apologized. They told them, "We're good. Don't worry. You didn't do this. Hashem planned this." They squashed it. Now they're going to go bring Abba. Oh, it's so exciting. Oh, I know you're going to leave. And you have to understand, leaving is not going today and coming back tomorrow. They have to travel. They have to pack up their life. They have to come back. It takes some time. So here we are, this departing cry. And what's behind cry number 4? So it says, Vayipol al tzavare Binyamin. Yosef falls on the necks of Binyamin. Tzavare is plural. They should have said tzavar. Tzavar Binyamin is 1. Tzavare is 2. So the question is, first of all, right off the bat, just grammatically, why does it say over here in plural when it should be singular? Let's continue. We'll get to that in a second. Vayipol al tzavare Binyamin achiv, vayef. He falls on the neck of Binyamin and he cries. Ubinyamin bachal tzavarav, and Binyamin also cried on his shoulders. Vaynashek lechol echav, he kisses all his brothers. Vayef, he cries again. Vayef alehem, vachechen divu echav ito. And then the brothers had some departing words. We're not going to go into it. We're trying to focus on the crying. Rashi tells us that the reason why they cried, Vayipol al tzavare Binyamin achiv vayef, al shnei mikdashot שעתידין להיות בחלקו של בנימין. Both Bet HaMikdash are going to be in the section of the land of Israel that belonged to Binyamin. וסופן להיחרב. And eventually they're going to get destroyed. Yosef is crying over the destruction of the 2 temples. ובנימין בחל צוואריו. Binyamin also cries, and it says why? על משכן שילה שעתיד להיות בחלקו של יוסף וסופו להיחרב. That there was also a mishkan that was built in Shiloh and also got destroyed in the section of Yosef, which was Shechem. So, very interesting one over here. This one I really enjoyed. One of the Mefarshim over here said something very interesting. He says, why is it written tzavare? Why is it when the pasuk says that Yosef cried on the necks, plural, like 2 necks of Binyamin? You should have just 1 neck. Rashi says, because of the 2 Batei Mikdashot, so there was a hint in the world, a hint in the word of the tzavare plural to hint to us is going to be two Beit Mikdashim that are going to be destroyed. He brings a pasuk from Shir HaShirim that says Tzavarech kemigdal Hashem. He says Tzavarech, your neck is like a tower. So what does neck and tower have to do with? What does Bet HaMikdash and a neck have to be together? Like, I understand that, Shlomo HaMelech is being poetic. And I understand that even over here in the Torah, in the Pasuk, we have a connection to Bet HaMikdash. But why is there a connection between this body part, the neck, and Bet HaMikdash? Could have been something else.
It's a conduit from below to up.
Very good.
Excellent.
I actually saw that before. Also, this is the physical.
Yes.
It's
Yeah,
mostly
right.
physical. The neshama. If somebody ever tells you, where's your neshama? Where does the neshama reside? It's right here. The neshama is right here. So the neck connects the physical to the spiritual. So you have a good point. It connects the physical to the spiritual. It's a connector. Siftei Chachamim says something unbelievable. Something that is really nice. It says, the reason that Bet HaMikdash is connected to the word neck is just like the neck is the source of life, where from here all the breathing comes, and all the life goes through this canal, that the person eats, drinks, and even breathes from here. Similarly is Bet HaMikdash. All the abundance of a person's lifeline, his ruchaniut, his gashmiut, everything that a person's life, his spirituality, or everything that is connected to the mundane, to the worldly things, are all coming through Bet HaMikdash. And that's why it says that Tzavare Binyamin, if you take the word Tzavare Binyamin, the necks of Binyamin, it has the numerical value of 469, which is the same numerical value of the word Hamikdash. Just like the Bet HaMikdash is the lifeline of a Jew, just like the neck is the one that delivers all the lifeline to the body, similarly the Bet HaMikdash is what supports, that gives the lifeline to a person as well. I really, really like that one.
I have a question.
Sure.
You said that the Beit HaMikdash was in the tribe of Benjamin, but the Beit HaMikdash was in Jerusalem, and that was Yehuda.
Yes. Yehuda is Yerushalayim, but the section of Bet HaMikdash, that section is Binyamin.
Also, you mentioned neck, right? Aren't the Jews also referred to as stiff-necked people?
Don't give me content for a new class. Don't get the wheels turning for a new class, because it'll take me off track. But yes, absolutely, we are called a stiff-necked nation. Me'am Loez continues. So Me'am Loez adds to this point something. He says on Tzavare Binyamin, he says when Bet HaMikdash was around, the Jewish people were in peace, everything was good, and their neck was straight. You know when things are good, you walk around with a straight back, with your head lifted up. When you're depressed, what happens? Your head is down. He says when the Jewish people have Bet HaMikdash, they walk around with their heads up. What puts the head up? The neck. But after Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of our sins, the head of the Jewish people is lowered again. And their neck is once again bent over, and they are now subjugated to be amongst the nation. And there's nothing more degraded or more lower than a Jew living amongst the Gentiles without Bet HaMikdash being built. And just like the neck of a person gives them their life, and when you cut his head, he's dead. Similarly, is when the Jews live without Bet HaMikdash, it's like you suck the life out of them. Matok Ha'or adds another layer to this. And he says, the reason why Yosef cried, it was a happy cry. Bechi shel simcha. That what? He was actually happy. Yosef was happy about the destruction of both Bet HaMikdash. Why? Because he was happy that Hashem took out his anger on stones and wood and not on the Jewish people. What did he do? So he destroyed a building. We're still here. Imagine if his anger was to annihilate us. He says, I'm sick of these people. That's it. Let's get rid of them. He said that one time already with Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, I'll start over with you. What if you had the same notion after what we did in the first Bet HaMikdash or second Bet HaMikdash? He could have said, get rid of them. We start over with maybe one of the prophets that were there. So Yosef was happy. He says, better that an edifice, a building made from stones and wood be destroyed, but Am Yisrael Chai, we still live.
Yeah.
It was a cry out of happiness. That was also a very nice point. Me'am Loez brings another beautiful point. He says, "Vaynashek lechol echav vayevka lehem." This one time where he was embracing his brothers, kissing each one and crying with each one of them. Amad shakam ubacha mechamat ahava. You know why he cried? He cried because he loved them. Did you ever cry so much because you love someone? Crickets?
Yes.
Yes? Never loved someone so much you cried? Usually happens after a breakup.
Or after
After a
death.
breakup, everyone cries, I love him so much!
Or after a death.
I want him back!
Something happened to them.
Huh?
If you cry over loved ones, something happened to them.
He's crying because he loves them.
Yeah, but that's because they're living. He was crying over a loved one, but something happened to them.
Something wrong.
That's a good point. Me'am Loez says something similar. He says that he stood, he hugged, and he cried because he loved them. Why? Me'am Loez gives us a little bit of a commentary.
By joy we can cry. The emotion.
Correct. Whatever you're saying is right here. Yeah, no, seriously. Me'am Loez says, "Pa'amim zolgim ha'inayim v'od mechamat simcha." He says sometimes people cry out of joy. ובפרט שנפגשים שני אחים וידידים שזה זמן רב לא ראו את זה. Especially when brothers or friends see each other, when they didn't see each other in a very long time. Did you ever have that experience that you didn't see somebody for a very, very long time, you break out in crying? I'm going to tell you, I had this experience with my father. When I was younger, in my 20s, I used to work in Las Vegas. And I used to visit only like, it started every 2 weeks, then after a month, and after 2 months. That's what happens. After, like when you're young, it becomes longer and longer and longer. So one time I stayed for a very long time, for 3 months. And my father knew that I was coming, but when I came in a taxi, and the same time that I came out of the taxi, my father just opening up the door, and when he saw me, he was so in shock. My father cried. My father doesn't cry. It was like maybe the first time ever in my life that I saw my father cry. Out of what? Emotion, love. You got to see his son after not seeing him so long. The feeling snuck up on him. Another time that I felt something like this is my daughter. My daughter, when she was very young, like a baby, I used to travel a lot for work. So when I would come home from the airport, when I open up the door and she see me, a baby has such raw emotions, she would plop on the floor and cry. And it was so funny that a person has like an instant reaction to do what? Cry. So this is what's happening over here. He says, did you ever see the two brothers or two friends when they get together after they didn't see each other for a very long time and they cry? He says, that's what happened over here. And he says, and there's a big difference between this type of crying and the type of tears that come out of sorrow or bitterness. These are dma'ot shesimcha shemetukim. These are tears of joy and happiness, and they're not bitter tears, they're sweet tears. Furthermore, he saw in Ruach HaKodesh something else. He's looking at all his brothers and he's crying. He's looking at all his brothers and he's crying. Why? He had a prophecy. He saw in Ruach HaKodesh. He looked into the future and he saw, because they sold him, there's a price to pay. I forgive you. Hashem has an open debt with you. Hashem says, your neshamot still have to come back and pay the price for what you did to me. And that's when we got the Asara Haruge Malchut, the 10 martyrs, the 10 tzaddikim, big tzaddikim that were killed by the Roman Empire. Rabbi Akiva was one of them. All these crazy stories that we had. Each one of those Haruge Malchut was a Gilgul, a reincarnation of one of the brothers. Velachen bacha alehem. And that's why he cried, because he saw that in the future they're going to have to pay the price.
But didn't Joseph tell his brothers that they didn't sell him? They did it because God wanted him to be in Egypt to save the world.
Correct. But still there's a price. Because when you're tzaddik and you're such a high level, Hashem medagdek kechut ha'se'ara. And Yosef told him, Al ta'atzru, don't be sad now, because the punishment is not happening now. It's not going to happen in your lifetime. En lachem al achshosh. Don't worry about now. You're not going to get this punishment now. This is the Satan has no permission to hurt you in this lifetime. This is just, I'm crying because there's in the future there's asara harugei malchut sheyargu biglalchem. There's going to be 10 harugei malchut that are going to die because of you, and because of that he hugged them and he embraced them. And all of a sudden they were so embarrassed that they did that, and they were so relieved they don't have to pay the price in this lifetime, but in the next lifetime. And it says v'dibru imo. Over here in Hebrew we call this a sulcha. You know what's a sulcha? They made up, completely made up. Why? If you remember in the beginning, what was the problem with their brothers? Shelo yachlu ledaber imo. They couldn't speak to him. They couldn't even talk. At this moment, from the busha of everything, at this moment, in this embrace, they came back, ledaber imo. They came back to being able to speak. Meaning, closure. Sometimes in life you need closure. When you go through life and there's things that hurt you, things that bother you, that you need closure. Closure is a release. And crying with closure is good.
Also, there isn't a statement in the Bible that the children will not pay for the sins of their parents.
I'll answer it after the class. And these are not their children. It's a gilgul. It's a different path of rectification. But I'll answer it differently. I'll answer it, after the class. The children did not pay for it. Their neshamot, as reincarnations, as gilgul, paid for it. It's a different thing altogether. So we see over here that over here the brothers are fully made up. And here is a very, very strong point that I wanted to share with you guys.
Sulha is also Arabic. The word sulha.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's like almost modern Hebrew slang, you know? Okay. So we said that they're crying because of the Bet HaMikdash. It's going to be on the section of Binyamin. Sofo lecharev. The question is, Madua ka'et niskarim Binyamin v'Yosef v'Bet HaMikdash. Right now, they're bonding. Right now, they have so much to make up for. All these years of not being together. Right now, they have this whole mission of picking up the family, bringing up over here. Why are they talking about the destruction of Bet HaMikdash? No better time. Do it later. Talk about it over the Shabbat table when they're in Goshna. Right? When they come to Goshen, let it be one of the Friday night schmoozes that they talk about. Why all of a sudden now they're talking about it? It's 22 years they didn't see one another, and now they're reminding Binyamin and Yosef about Bet HaMikdash. So the Midrash over here says something incredible. It says that Yosef tells Binyamin, Bet HaMikdash shebechelkecha yicharev. He says, you know that the Bet HaMikdash that's going to be built in your portion is going to be destroyed. Why did Bet HaMikdash get destroyed? Sinat Chinam. Everybody knows, Sinat Chinam. So he tells them, Bet HaMikdash bechelkecha yicharev biglas Sinat Chinam. He says, and that's exactly this baseless hatred that the Bet HaMikdash is going to be destroyed is the same reason why we didn't meet for 22 years. Why? Because my brothers were jealous of me. They sold me. And the Chidah said that Sinat Chinam Mekor'a Kin'ah. The Chidah says, you know how you get to baseless hatred? The root of baseless hatred is Kin'ah. When jealous. When somebody is jealous of somebody, it leads to baseless hatred. When somebody has jealousy, it leads to hating somebody for no good reason. Or maybe a good reason, because they're jealous. However, we see over here, Yosef is telling Binyamin, look at the reason I was sold with Sinat Chinam, and it's the exact reason why Bet HaMikdash is going to get destroyed. That's what they're crying. Meaning what? The problem persists.
Yeah.
The problem continues. In the Yerushalmi it says that the reason why we have a long exile is because of the selling of Yosef. And why we have difficulties in the exile is because Chet HaEgel. Our life right now of us living outside of Israel and all this anti-Semitism, which comes in every generation, and the hardships that we go through. So the length is because of the selling of Yosef. The hardship is because of Chet HaEgel. And that's why at that particular moment, it was appropriate to cry for Bet HaMikdash. Because why? The Sinat Chinam that got Yosef sold by his brothers is the Sinat Chinam that the Bet HaMikdash is going to be destroyed on. Beautiful. So we see over here, why did Yosef cry? Yosef cried because he loved his brothers. Yosef cried because of the future of what's going to happen to their neshamot, the Gilgulim and the Harugei Malchut, Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyrs that are going to be killed because of this. And also over the bitterness of the future of the Jewish people because of what happened with their brothers. Could you imagine? Practically everything that we're going through, all this hardship that we're going through, is because what happened with Yosef and his brothers. Look at the ripple effect. Look at the repercussion of what happened in that moment between the Shevatim. I'm sorry about the length of this class, but it has to be this long.
Okay.
If anybody needs to go, you're more than welcome to go. If you're willing to stay, we just have about
No, you have all the time.
15 minutes left.
And coffee.
Maybe 15 minutes left, but you know what it is? This was an in-depth lesson that had to happen this way.
Please.
Because we're covering everything, so you walk out, you can close the book and say, I know why Yosef cried.
We love it. Go ahead.
No, just I apologize. I don't like holding people hostage. Okay, Perek Mem Vav, Pasuk Chavtet. Let's go. Number 5. Don't worry, 6, 7, and 8 are all grouped together. Just letting you know. 6, 7, 8 are all going to be grouped together, so it's not going to be very long. We're almost there, almost there. Okay, Mem Vav Chavtet. Let's do this. Where are we now? You ready for this one? Yosef meets Yaakov. Could you imagine? Finally, the whole story. Yosef meets Yaakov. And the pasuk goes as such. V'yesor Yosef merkabto, v'ya likat Yisrael aviv Goshna. And Yosef loads up his chariot and he rides towards his father in the land of Goshna. Vayera elav, and he sees him. Vayipol al tzavarav, once again he falls on the neck of his father. Vayevk, and he cries al tzavarav od, and he cried more. Very interesting what happened here in the time of Yosef and Yaakov meeting. Before I go into it, you tell me, what should have happened? The father and the son finally meet after all these years. We know the whole background story. What should have happened in this moment?
Shouldn't the father cried also?
Yaakov crying? Okay. Happiness? Party?
Yosef.
So look what happened over here. It says, רק יוסף נראה לאביו ויבך. It says that only Yosef cried, not Yaakov. Side point, we don't see anywhere where the brothers cried also. By the way, with this entire story, maybe we'll do a class on all the other brothers and all their qualities, but footnote or a little side note, we don't see the brothers crying not even once for one thing. Okay? And right here also, it's in the Midrash, it said that Yaakov was crying over the loss of his son, and he was like mourning him because he wasn't around. But we see that the whole thing of crying is mostly about Yosef. But nevertheless, it says that when Yaakov and Yosef met together, only Yosef cried, not Yaakov. Aval, Yaakov, when he fell on the neck of Yosef, lo neshako, he didn't kiss him. ואמרו רבותינו שהיה קורא קריאת שמע. Let me give you the visual. Yosef and Yaakov are coming together. Yosef is one side crying. Yaakov is on the other side. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. What two opposite reactions? Why would that be the reality of that moment? So, it's interesting. It says Yaakov bacha. There's another. I'm sorry. The Ramban says that Yaakov did cry. He says no. The Ramban says in reality it was Yaakov that was crying. You know why? Because reality dictates when an old man that lost his son for 22 years finally sees his kid. You know what he does? He breaks down and cries. That's the reality of what things happen. It's Yaakov that cried. That's what the Ramban holds. It says, the Zohar Kadosh says about this interaction, Yaakov yada ki המרכבה שלו בעולם העליון חסרה. Yaakov knew that the God's holy chariot, whatever that means, in the upper worlds is missing. It's like imagine you have a puzzle and it's missing a piece. Imagine you have like a Lego and it's missing a wheel. I don't know, whatever you want to, how you want to imagine it. There's a missing piece to make something complete. That the Merkava of the Olam Elyon was missing. And the only way it was going to be complete is if Yaakov Avinu would have 12 children. Because there had to come the progeny, the lineage of 12. If Yaakov was not going to have 12 children, what would happen? He didn't fulfill his mission in this world. Im lo hayu lo 12 shvatim. Uviroto et Yosef. As soon as he saw Yosef, he reached that moment. I have 12 kids now. So what did he do? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, להראות שכולם באחדות והמרכבה שלמה. He says to show you, I reached my goal. My life mission has been achieved. I have 12 children that are in peace and united, and now the Merkava, this holy chariot in the Shamayim, is complete. Job done. Check. That's why his reaction was Shema Yisrael, and Yosef was crying. It seems to me that what happened when Yosef and Yaakov met, it doesn't need explanation. It's like the Ramban said, it's just a raw emotion of a father and a son finally connecting. The reason why I feel that that's really what's happening over here is because of my experience with my dad, because of my experience with my daughter. It's just raw. There's no explaining. You don't know why you feel like you want to cry. There's nothing. I love my dad. He loves me. I love my daughter. She loves me. Why are we crying? I don't know. It's a raw emotion that's stirred up from the depths of your heart, and that's just what it is. Of course, there's a background story to why Yaakov should cry. There's a background story to what Yosef. But what happened here was a raw emotion. And what was the raw reaction? Yosef, his standard, true emotion, the release, the closure. Let me release, let me cry. Yaakov is on such a high plane. At that moment, what is he thinking? Finally, my spiritual endeavor, Shema Yisrael, the Mekava is done. He's on a different frequency. He's on a different channel. The last 3 times that Yaakov cried, number 6, number 7, and number 8. I'm sorry. The last 3 times that Yosef cried, number 6, number 7, and number 8, was with the passing of Yaakov. This is when Yaakov passed away. It says, the 3 pesukim are Vayipol Yosef al penei aviv vayevk alav vayishaklo. That's when he passed away. And then then there's the collective cry of all of Egypt. Vayifku oto Mitzrayim 70 yom. That Yosef, his brothers, and all of Egypt cried for 70 days over the loss of Yaakov. And then the last pasuk is Vayiru achei Yosef ki met avihem vayomeru lo istemenu Yosef. This is that the pasuk that talks about the brothers of Yosef saw that their father passed away, and they came to Yosef and they said, please don't kill us. The entire time that Abba was alive, maybe you were playing nice and you weren't going to do it and you weren't going to seek revenge. Now that Abba is dead, can you please not kill us? What is Yosef's reaction? He cried? Well, how'd you figure that out? Very good. It says, Vayevk Yosef bedaberam elav. He says, he starts to cry. I can't believe this is what you think. There's no such thing. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to support you. You and your children. I'm here for you. I'm not holding any grudge. Those were the 3 last pesukim that talk about Yosef crying. And
is that when he says to his brothers that they did not sell him, but it was the will of God?
no, that's way earlier.
Much earlier.
Okay.
But in a sense,
So over here, what we have in the final cries is the cry of mourning. When somebody dies, one of the most common things that people do when somebody passes away is crying. Why do people cry when somebody dies? They miss him. It hurts. The separation,
Loneliness.
the loneliness,
No coming back.
the disbelief, the fact that the person is no longer here, quote unquote, in a physical form, in a spiritual form. They cease to exist. So many emotions. Somebody that you're so used to, you share life with. Maybe it's a husband, maybe it's a wife, maybe it's a mother, a father, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a brother, a sister, a good friend. Some people cry their hearts out for a puppy, for a dog that passes away. What? It's you're losing an emotional connection. So over here we see that the last cries that Yosef had are the cries that come with losing a loved one, mourning. And crying for someone that is dead is healthy. It's part of the grieving process, and people that don't do it properly suffer from it years later. Chazal tell us that it's appropriate for people to cry in the levaya, of course, in the burial, the funeral, and then they say that they give like these checkpoints: 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, and 12 months. They give 5 checkpoints where it's appropriate to cry. Shlosha yamim labechi. He says 3 days non-stop crying. Then there's the Shiva. What's the Shiva? The Shiva is like you reach a checkpoint where things start to not calm down, but it's different from day one. It's different from day 3. The Shloshim is also, it's a different milestone. And then there's the Shtemesre Chodesh, where over there the Gemara says even forgetfulness comes into place, where a person's pain starts to disappear a little bit. Now, diminish, correct, good word. So we see over here, why is it good to cry? There's a release, there's closure. It's good to have those emotions not be built up and kept inside. It's the appropriate thing to do to grieve properly. People that don't grieve properly, they're wearing black clothes 5 years later, still hating on God, saying, why did you take him from me? There's a proper process that a person needs to do in the first 3 days, in the first 7 days, in the first 30 days, in the first year. And after that, you honor them once a year. You're not supposed to hold on. You're not supposed to not cry. You're not supposed to not let go. You're supposed to go through this process. And the last part of Yosef's crying had to do with the mourning of Yaakov Avinu. Because each stage has its purpose and release of grief. And the one that doesn't grieve properly suffers later on, and I can tell you that I've seen this before. So, in conclusion, we spoke about Yosef's crying, Vechi Yosef. We see that it's not a simple thing. It's not somebody that just breaks down and cries every time he bumps a toe, right? It's not something like a simple, over-emotional, over-dramatic person that wears his heart on his sleeve, and the minute he watches like some sort of like an AT&T commercial, he starts to cry, right? It's not like one of those. It's more like there is reason to every single tear and every single cry, and it was appropriate and had purpose. Every single moment had either an awakening or an emotional awakening that stirred up in him, which was appropriate, which was healthy, and which was warranted. There was not one time over there that Yosef cried and it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't one time where Yosef was just emotionally out of control. We see that up until his brothers coming into the picture, he didn't shed a tear, to the toughest life that a person could have. Yet, at the right time, he did use the tool of crying, the tool of release of emotions, in order to heal, in order to create closure, in order to reconnect, in order to love again, in order to forgive. Masechet Brachot, on the 32nd page, on the second side, says, Miyom shecharav Bet HaMikdash nina'alu sha'arei tefillah. From the day that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, the gates of prayer are locked. Make sure you go to Minyan tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning and pray. Imagine learning that the gates of prayer are locked, and we're supposed to go pray every day. But the gates of prayer are locked. What are we going to pray for?
In the house. My father, we are a big family. Early in the morning, he was praying and fixing the breakfast for the children. We are a big family. We go to school. And he was praying at the same time.
Let's see what Masechet Brachot says. Huh? So it says, Miyom shenichrav Bet HaMikdash na'alu sha'arei tefillah. From the day that the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, the gates of tefillah are locked. Ve'af al pi shenina'alu sha'arei tefillah. Even though that the gates of prayer are locked, sha'arei dimah lo nina'alu. The gates of tears are not locked. Meaning, whenever you find yourself in an opportunity to cry, know that gate into heaven is open. use that opportunity, use that moment, use that tear to cry, because that's an open door. Now, we know that when a person cries, and Hashem sees that, and that gate is open, it melts the barriers between a person and God. And when a person cries, it fizzles away all the barriers that are between a person and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And every teardrop that you do has power for your tefillah to be heard. If this is the case, then let's plug in Yosef to this learning. What was Yosef doing every time that he was crying? He was just connecting more to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every time he cried, what did he do? He used that opportunity to get closer and closer and closer to Hashem. How do we know that? Because he never sought revenge. He never sought revenge on his brothers. He never took his status in Egypt to anywhere else for his personal gain. Every time that he cried, he knew he knows that those are the gates of heaven that open up, and that's what brings you closer to Hashem, and to build a closer connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's why it says all the time, when his brothers were when he came to be with his brothers, and they were so scared of him, he says, what? Ki me'elokim. Hashem created this. I didn't. You guys didn't bring me here to Egypt. Hashem did it. Me'et Hashem akol. Even Perek Nun, in this week's parasha, Pasuk Yudchet, what does he say? And with this I'll conclude. In Perek Nun, Pasuk Yudchet, he says, Vayomer lehem Yosef, Al tirau, ki atachat Elokim ani. He says, don't worry. You have no fear with me. I am everything that I'm doing. Everything that I'm doing is beneath Hakadosh Baruch Hu, which basically means that he used every crying session just to create a stronger bond in Hashem, and that's why he was able to be sold in a pit, threatened, thrown away, disconnected from family, disconnected from his brothers, go through this whole process and still not sin. You know, to get the title of tzaddik is not so simple. Can you please tell me how many people are called tzaddik? We have who? Who?
Only Yosef.
Noach was ish tzaddik. Yosef had tzaddik, right? Who else is called tzaddik? Hashem is called tzaddik. Hashem tzaddik bechol v'rachav, v'chasid bechol ma'asav.
Shimon HaTzadik, no?
Shimon HaTzadik. This is in the Tanaic era. So what do we have over here? We see that it's not easy to get that title. How do you get a tzaddik? How do you get this close? It seemed that Yosef took this emotional, how should we call it, quality, and he leveraged it. He leveraged it to do tikkunim. He leveraged it to connect. He leveraged it to do everything that's possible to better the situation for him and for his family. I'm not saying for anybody to go and cry tomorrow, but what's good is to know that there are many ways to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov Avinu, even though that he looked tired and old and bent over and all that, he did a tremendous life work that till today we're cashing in on his credit, on his zechuyot. Yosef had a different path, and today we learned in depth the way of Yosef with his emotional quality of Bechi. Hashem vayech atkhem, sameach atkhem, and Be'ezrat Hashem we see you on Wednesday for the Tanya class.